thank you for an extremely courageous, well-thought-through and eloquent speech. My question is, there's a little anecdote very quickly in half a minute. Back in 1993 or 4, I was president of the Society of Arab Students at Harvard. And right around then, there was a UN resolution equating Zionism to racism. And so the organization had done some work on raising awareness on that issue and merely spreading flyers with the text of the resolution to various campus dorms. Of course, Hillel at the time got very upset and opened an entire investigation on whether this was anti-Semitic and so on and so forth. It ended well. I wasn't expelled and I wasn't defined to be anti-Semitic. But it brings me to my question, which is, there are a lot of my Jewish colleagues who came to us privately after the fact and were very upset by what had happened and felt that the actions that were taken weren't correct and so on and so forth. And my question is, what do you tell these Jewish students, adults, and others who really are sometimes against the mainstream Israeli lobby, but who just don't feel it's worthwhile to stand up and speak their minds because it's not worth it. It's so strong, and you speak up against an employer, you speak up against a professor, you speak up against your family, and then you're shunned by all of them, or all these other obvious consequences. What do you say to these people to make it worthwhile for them to stand up and really speak their mind and act accordingly?
Okay, I would just say that when Steve and I wrote the book, and we go around and talk to people, we talk to all sorts of different groups of people of all persuasions, and we tell them basically the same thing. With regard to talking to groups that include large numbers of Jews or even small numbers of Jews, what we basically try to do is make the argument that if you care greatly about Israel, and of course we're assuming that many of them do, and that's perfectly understandable and perfectly legitimate, that if you care greatly about Israel, the course that we are now on is a disaster for Israel. It is not only a morally bankrupt policy from Israel's point of view, it's a strategically bankrupt policy. And if you really care about Israel, what you would be doing is arguing for the United States to put pressure on Israel to change its behavior. As I've tried to emphasize here, it would have been in Israel's best interest if the United States had been able to put pressure on it to stop building settlements a long time ago. And if the United States had pressured Israel into allowing for the creation of a Palestinian state, we wouldn't live in a perfect world in the Middle East today by any means. But the situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis, in my opinion, would be a lot better if there was a viable Palestinian state. And I think that the more Jews that understand this, the more likely it is that we can maybe get this back on the right track and get some sort of meaningful solution. So I have not by any means been reluctant to talk to American Jews or Canadian Jews or Israelis about this subject, or as Steve for that matter. We're going to go to Israel later this spring, and we're going to talk there. We both talk to Jewish groups, and hopefully our message will get through to those people. We're not foolish enough to think that the vast majority of people who hear us, whether they're Jewish or not, are going to agree with us. But we do think it's nevertheless important just to get this issue out into the open and to start talking about it. And if people want to disagree and fight about it, fine, that's important. The problem we face is that up to now, certainly in the United States, and I would assume this is true in Canada, it's been very hard just to have a discussion. This has been a taboo subject. And that is not in anybody's interest.